Hello, hi, a very good afternoon to everyone, to all the viewers from Singapore Property Expo who are tuning in. A big welcome to this session on the House of Suntory. So over here today, there's me, I'm from Beam Suntory, and then there's Jamie here, our regional brand ambassador for all our House of Suntory and Beam Suntory brands. So big welcome to you again. So for today, we will take you through, on the journey to some fantastic Japanese spirits, what we call the House of Suntory. There are three particular brands that we'll talk about today. First is Roku Gin, our flagship Japanese craft gin, and then we will move on to two other categories, a vodka, Haku vodka, and finally Cheetah whiskey. So these are three great brands from the House of Suntory, specially crafted. And along the way, usually if it's a live session, you can ask questions along the way, but we're very sure today's session is going to be as interactive and fun as possible. And, you will definitely learn a lot about these three great brands. So without further ado, let's have Jamie take us through the first one, Roku Gin, the Japanese craft gin.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ulrich. My name is Jamie. I'm the brand ambassador for Beam Suntory in Southeast Asia. And today we have a great lineup of products coming from Suntory, Japan. So each one of these products is uniquely Japanese, uniquely Suntory, and we're just going to learn a little bit more about them. So I think it's, knowledge is power, and, we'll definitely get you some knowledge today. So without taking up too much, we're going to start off, and you guys can see up on your screen, maybe?
Yes, it's...
You can see up on your screen, Roku Gin. So there's a few words there I want you to pay attention to before we get started. It says, the Japanese craft gin. And, we started the word gin. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about what gin is and what gin isn't. So gin is really defined as a distilled spirit that has been flavored with juniper berries. And recently, you'll see also in the market many craft gins. And, what becomes a craft gin? Craft gins are made differently from what we would call a traditional gin, or like a London dry style, or even a Dutch style gin. And of course, Japanese, meaning it is made in Japan and uniquely Japanese. So what makes us different is this idea, starting even with the name, is this idea of roku, of six, is Japanese word for six. And the six that we talk about is actually located, is in reference to the 6 Japanese botanicals that we are using to make Roku Gin. Now, these are the 6, you can see them up on your screen. So it is sakura flower, sakura leaf, sencha tea, gyokuro tea, sancho pepper, and yuzu. So these are 6 very unique Japanese flavor profiles that are iconic to Japan and iconic to Japanese culture and taste and food. Now, when thinking about a craft gin, and Suntory was thinking about this Roku concept, was not only taking these 6 Japanese botanicals, but spreading them out over the seasons. Now, in Japan, seasonality is extremely important in the production of produce, whether that's fruits or vegetables or herbs or teas or anything that is grown in Japan that comes from nature. Is very season specific, because Japan is a very temperate climate. It has, a distinct spring, a distinct summer, a distinct fall or autumn, and a distinct winter. And of course, the more north you go in Japan, the more distinct that winter can be. So the idea was to choose each of these botanicals to represent different seasons. So we have sakura flowers, sakura leaf coming in the spring, which is cherry blossom season, which is probably the most photogenic time to ever go to Japan and go to the cherry blossom orchards. So having this sakura flavor, which is iconic Japan, to the summer where we harvest the green teas, and we've chosen 2, one which is sencha and one is a gyokuro, which is a cured tea. Then we have sancho pepper, which comes out in the autumn, which is similar to white pepper, but a very uniquely distinctive Japanese flavor. In fact, if you go in Japan, there'll always be a bottle of sancho pepper on pretty much almost every restaurant table, and it's really delicious on rice, for example. And then yuzu, which is a winter citrus fruit. So it ripens during the winter months. And again, has a very distinctive, unique flavor that is distinctively Japanese, right? So we're using these 6 ingredients spread over 4 seasons. And this is what we call, and what we consider the real craft part about our gin, is that not only are we using these, unique botanicals and unique flavors, which a lot of craft gins are known for, but we're actually spreading out the collection of these flavors over a 1 year period. So technically, in order for us to gather all the botanicals to make Roku gin, we must take 1 year to do it. And as you know, most people are very impatient, especially if you're trying to bring a product to market. And in Japanese culture, we're quite patient, and we're always looking to bring the best, no matter how long it takes. And that infuses itself into the Roku concept. So this is made at the oldest production base in Japan. It was founded in 1919 by Suntory, the founder of Suntory. It's located in Osaka. And this is where we kind of started. So this is a statue of Sanjiro-san in front of the production facility, and this is what he built first. And he built this a few years before even building the Yamazaki distillery. So this is where it all started for Suntory. And what Suntory-san was really interested in making was, to the right there, is that Akadama port wine. So he had some dealings with Portuguese businessmen in Japan at the time, and was interested in making port wine from Japanese grapes. And his first venture, his first Japanese produced Western style spirit was Akadama port wine, which is still made in kind of very small quantities today to keep the tradition alive of Sanjiro Tori. And then eventually he went into whiskey, but the Osaka has always been there, always producing different spirits for Japan. And then eventually internationally, we started releasing much more international brands into the markets. So we do produce a lot of different things at Osaka. It is a real workhorse for us. We have infusion tanks, 100% pot still, though. We have a collection of 4 pot stills. And it's where we produce liqueurs. So we produce peach liqueurs, cherry liqueurs, banana liqueurs, other ones. In addition to, of course, all the ingredients that we use in Roku gin. So almost every month, there's a new product going through Osaka, and it's being produced as a flavored spirit. Now at Suntory, we have a very long history. Started off, so that's Sanjiro Tori. He started off as owning a shop, selling Japanese spirits, Japanese sake, and then bringing in some other things from Europe. And then eventually got into the blending to the making, and then founded Osaka to make Akadama, and then later on built Yamazaki in 1923 to be the first whiskey distillery in Japan. So the history of Suntory goes back, over 100 years now, and has really been focused on traditional Japanese, but also bringing in that sort of international spirit to Japan. So one question everybody asks is, why is Suntory suddenly making a gin? Because I keep talking about Yamazaki, which is probably our most famous product. But Sanjiro Tori actually launched the first gin by Suntory in 1936, which actually predates the first successful whiskey ever made by us. So he launched the Hermes gin, and over the years launched a lot of domestic gin. So we made Suntory dry gin, Suntory ice gin, of which is still available in the domestic only market. So you can only find these in Japan. And then with everything learned over the last 100 years about gin making, it was finally decided to release an international gin, and that became Roku. And that's kind of the story. So 100 years in one bottle, and 1 year, 100 plus 1, just because of the time for the botanicals. So those are the botanicals. I talked about them before, the 6 Japanese: sakura leaf, sakura flower, sencha tea, gokuro tea, sancho pepper, and yuzu. But we also layer this on top of a 8 botanical London dry style gin, including, of course, juniper, which, as you remember, follows the definition of gin. So juniper, coriander, angelica, cinnamon, cardamom, bitter orange, and lemon. And these are very traditional London dry style botanicals, and then we're layering those 6 Japanese botanicals up on top. So it's a very, very, complex, very layered gin. Right?
Jamie, so just quick question. So
sure.
I think you did mention this just now. So for a gin to be a gin, it does have to have juniper berries, right? That is like the essential
base. Correct. So the etymology of the word gin traces back to the word juniper.
Okay.
But through several different languages. So in Holland, for example, they call it Genever, which is Dutch gin. And this idea of flavoring spirit with juniper comes back from the town of Geneviève in France, which actually also means juniper. So you went from Genevieve to Geneva, and then when it crossed the English Channel into England, they shortened it to gin.
Okay.
But the word itself comes from juniper.
Okay. Do you know if there are any I don't know, strict governing like statutes that says that a percentage of the gin must be made from the juniper distillate, or as long as it's juniper inside?
Yeah, I think it's pretty like tradition rather than anything. If there's any sort of country that would have any sort of rules about it, would be the Dutch.
Okay.
Because Geneva is the national spirit of Scotland. Oh, sorry, of of Holland.
Okay.
They sound very similar, and so they would have some sort of that. But it's mainly tradition. So
Okay.
all London dry style gin contains a juniper as a base. Dutch gin as well, and then I think craft gin kind of, started playing around with way too many flavors, and some of them got away from the tradition of gin, which was juniper, which we don't at Roku, of course. We continue the juniper tradition.
Understand. Okay.
All right. So any other question?
No, I think I mean it's all good.
I have lots of answers. So any questions? If you guys ever had a question, you feel free to somehow get it out. I'm full of answers. It's not always correct answers, though. Some of them are just good answers. Anyway, so one key concept that I want to talk about for Roku is this idea of shun. And this is a Japanese word that really means about only processing and picking natural products when they are completely ripe, when they're completely ready. And like, so for example, sakura, is the best example. The cherry blossoms that we use are only ready during 1 to 2 weeks a year. So we have to actually have the trees, or people hand climb up the trees, and they pick the flowers by hand to sort them and bring them back for the distillery. So you can't pick sakura flower in August, right? It's only in like March, April, depending on the year, so but a very narrow time. So all the ingredients are treated that way, so we picked it. You can think of it as more like peak of perfection, right? When it's ripe on the tree, then it's ready to be used. And that's one reason why, for example, if you ever try buying Japanese produce, it's so expensive. Right? So this is the atelier itself. This is where we make it. And it's a collection of pot stills. And gin making is traditionally made in column stills, or what we call gin stills. But we're going to use a traditional pot still. These are whiskey style pot stills, but it can be used for many, many different things. So we have 3 copper pot stills and 1 stainless steel pot still at Osaka. And now you can see that they're all different sizes and all different shapes there in the picture. And that's important because they all produce different types of qualities of spirit, so in terms of aromas and flavors that carry through the distillation, different sizes and shapes of stills make all the difference. So what we have here is the ability to, all the ingredients, for example, are matched to their own still. So for example, yuzu is only distilled in still number 3. Sakura flower is only distilled in still number 2, which is a stainless steel vacuum still, and so on and so forth. So it was determined which still made the best flavor for that individual product. And then every year when that product comes back out, it is only distilled through the single still. So there's a level of craftsmanship, a level of detail that is very exacting. Now, how does it taste? Well, I just kind of give you kind of examples. That's some still number 3. And it's all highly technical. And I'll get a little bit in the technical when I talk about yuzu, is because yuzu is a citrus fruit, and a citrus aroma, a citrus flavor is actually very, very common, right? And it's actually easy. You can get it from lemons, oranges, yuzu, any citrus fruit, grapefruit. But the problem here, or the challenge becomes, is that when I write that, and I put this on my bottle that it says yuzu, well, if you know what yuzu smells and tastes like, there's absolutely no substitute for it, right? Yuzu is an unmistakable aroma. So it was about creating this citrusy note, this yuzu note in it. And it's a technique we use in whiskey making, which is called cutting. So we don't use all the liquid from the distillation for yuzu. Only a certain portion of that distillate actually smells and tastes exactly like yuzu. So it's like very citrusy at the foreshot at the beginning, and then there's the cut, which is very yuzu. Then the faint, so the end of the distillation is also very citrusy, but less so. So the distinctiveness is important. So it is a cut of a yuzu distillate to smell exactly like yuzu. And when you open a bottle of Roku gin, you're going to notice that very distinctive yuzu aroma.
Mhm.
Sakura is a little bit also challenging as an aroma that we use. A lot of people don't use flowers are normally used in, say, the production, not much in the production of spirits, but more in the production of perfumes. And one reason is they use a technique called vacuum distillation in perfume. So this allows us to lower the heat. So in order for me to make alcohol, I need to heat the liquid up to 78, 79 degrees centigrade. But if I'm using a flower, that's too high of a heat. So it kind of cooks the flower. The heat, the cookedness comes, and it doesn't smell like a fresh flower. So the way to get around that is to use a vacuum still by sucking out the atmosphere or the air pressure out of the still. We lower the boiling point of alcohol. And then it still picks up that nice sort of light floral aroma. So again, you know, very specific ingredient, very specific distillation method in order to extract the best flavor and aroma from the spirit. All right, now this is the slide to end all slides. This is, you know, if you ever want, you know, and this is kind of how we build Roku Gin. And I think this is gives you a really good idea of how flavor profiles work. So I'll just explain it to you. You see in the center of your screen, you see juniper. That's the typical, that's the heart of a gin. You know, is the beating heart of a gin is juniper flavor. So in order to have Roku Gin being an actual gin, it starts off with a heart of juniper. Now surrounding that, and this is what was really key in the making, was the idea of these flavor profiles. So you see sweet floral, soft bitter, and tasty citrus. And these are like three major flavor profiles in most gins, London dry style or otherwise, right? And in a London dry style is the center wheel, which is built off. So the floral flavors are coming from the coriander, the angelica, and cinnamon are providing that soft bitterness, herbal greenness. And then the citrus is provided by lemon and orange peel. So you get that sort of rich sort of flavor notes coming through in that flavor wheel. Now to that, we're layering on 6 Japanese ingredients, the Roku Japanese ingredients. So the soft bitterness is enhanced by the sencha tea, the gyokuro tea, a little bit of spiciness from that sancho pepper. The citrus is enhanced by the yuzu, and then the floral coriander is enhanced further by the sakura flower and the sakura leaf. So we end up as a heart of juniper and many different flavors layered on top, with of course the 6 Japanese being the most prominent.
Mm.
So it's a very, very complex gin.
Yeah. Jimmy, so I think, yeah, for sure. So I understand that it's made with these 6 Japanese botanicals laid on top of 8 core or base ingredients. So
Correct.
when we talk about the first whiff, the first notes when we open a bottle of Roku, what do we get more of? Would it be like the yuzu or sakura or a perfect balance of both?
No, you're really going to get struck by the yuzu flavor. So I can pull up some tasting notes for you.
Okay.
And you'll see that we really start off with a yuzu top note, right? So the minute you nose it or even drink it, you're going to be struck by that yuzu sort of citrusy aroma. And then it's going to follow very closely with the sakura, right there. So it'll be yuzu, sakura, and then maybe a little bit of green tea in the aroma. Not everybody gets it in the aroma.
Okay.
But it'll have a nice floral, citrusy, sweet smell to it. And then on the flavor profile itself, you start to discover all the different ingredients, including, of course, the juniper.
Okay, understand. So how would you recommend the best way, I mean, to consume Roku gin, besides a gin and tonic for sure, but any, you know, top suggestions that you would recommend to anyone?
Well, I mean, I do always, and we do even at Roku, really recommend people start off with a gin and tonic. But if you're, you know, gin is traditionally a cocktail drink, right? It really is a cocktail drink. And another drink that I kind of like with it is to bring even more sort of, there's a very famous martini called the sakatini, which is just basically a few drops of sake stirred with gin and served ice cold with like a Japanese onion or something as a garnish. And that can be really interesting as well. So you get that nice like floral, citrusy from Roku, you know, a little bit of that sort of sake flavor in the background, and then, you know, a bit of a sour finish, which can be also very, very nice.
Okay, yeah. Would you recommend people consuming gin neat or no? on the rocks?
Generally, no. Unlike a whiskey, you don't normally consume a gin neat. That being said, I mean, the closest you would get would probably be a martini, which would be stirred over ice. And then, of course, the dilution and the gin. So that's a pretty straight drink, as a classic. The Roku gin actually works quite well as just on the rocks because the flavors are there. And the minute I add too many ingredients, like in terms of a cocktail, like the minute I add, like, say, lemon juice, so I make like a gin style sour, the lemon juice starts to really overpower the yuzu and the sakura flavors that the gin is best known for. So my personal opinion, the least amount of I do to Roku gin, the better it tastes. Or at least I get that pure gin element to it.
Okay, understand. Yeah. Okay, I think that was, thank you, Jimmy. That was a great introduction to Roku Gin. I mean, very exciting product. One of my favorite gins as well. Yeah.
Just go look for on the screen. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Okay, so yes, that wraps up the first part that we have for Roku. And then next we'll move on to Haku vodka. It's another craft spirit from the House of Suntory. So it's a Japanese vodka. And then before we finally end off with Chita whiskey.
Okay, so next up is going to from my desktop. See, I hate it with this.
Yeah, no, it's just a little
then
choppy.
You have like fire open and you can't.
Yeah, no, Jimmy, the screen is freezing a little, so.
It's,
Go.
Okay, so welcome back from the slight pause of technical difficulties here on Zoom. So we're going to move on to the next House of Suntory, what is Haku vodka. So we're going to move from gin and to vodka. So this is the newest addition to the family and to the house. And again, it's a Japanese craft vodka. So when we decided to make a vodka at Suntory, we wanted to do something different, something never been done, and then really paying attention to Japanese craftsmanship, history, and stuff like that. So whereas Roku, we were talking about uniquely Japanese flavors, now we're going to talk about something else uniquely Japanese. So it was, again, the House of Suntory you're already familiar with. We went through. Now, when the same time we launched, in 1956, the first vodka was launched by Suntory, which again was Hermes. Hermes is a total line, so that had gins, vodkas, spirit, other spirits, as well as liqueurs made for the Japanese domestic market. But again, taking everything learned over the last 100 years and putting it into something that would be internationally astounding for one, and something that nobody had ever seen or ever tasted before. So the result of this is Haku, and a little bit about the word, of course, right? Because we talk about Roku was 6. That was an easy one. But when we're talking about Haku, it's a little bit more complex. And the actual kanji means white, but it can be read many different ways, like many Asian languages. But really, we root it as referring to hakumai, which is Japanese white rice. And this is the origin of the liquid. So all spirits start off with a grain, and we've chosen for Haku to be hakumai. And hakumai is a very specific type of eating rice. So in Japan, there's different grades of rice, and this is an eating rice, actually called the emperor's rice, which used to be only consumed by the royal family of Japan. So it was grown specifically for them. So this is considered the best rice in Japan. So this was the rice that was chosen to be part of the best vodka in Japan. So it is made with a very traditional method. So we're starting off with this hakumai, this Japanese white rice, eating rice. We're going to use koji, which is another very distinctive Japanese product. It's a type of mold actually, and what it does is it converts starches to sugars, and it is used in the production of many things in Japan, including soy sauce, but also many other things, and I'll get into it a bit more. And then the last one would be bamboo charcoal, which is iconic in Japan. So they use it to purify water, and it signals purity. You can buy little bamboo charcoal sticks in the store, and you can drop them in your water, your bottle of water, and it'll filter and flavor the water to charcoal. It's very nice. So starts off with rice being the key ingredient. Of course, we all know how, or maybe you don't know, it's grown in these paddies, and then we once it's harvested, it's brown rice. It's still got the husk and other things on it. And in Japan, it gets polished to this pearl rice. So the husk and the bran are removed, and we get this white pearl rice left behind. And you can see it presented like that, or what we call in Japan, hakumai. So it's a very fine polish to the rice. They're actually the highest grades of this are actually almost identical sizes. So it's very well polished. And this is koji. So the next ingredient, so hakumai, the next key ingredient is koji. So it turns starch into sugar. It is well known for making an umami flavor and adds complexity. So uses the production of soy sauce, miso, vinegar, pickles, So it is iconic to Japanese cuisine, using umami. It's also used for using koji, and it is also used for one other important thing, which I'll get into again. So this is the charcoal stick. So this absorbs impurities, adds minerals, and gives it that very, like I said, again, something unique to Japan. And bamboo, of course, being a renewable resource, is also very environmentally friendly as well. So where does koji come in, and where does this come in? It kind of comes in, the idea is the most iconic thing made in Japan is sake, and the base of sake is rice. But sake is made with a sake grade rice, not an eating grade rice. But the first step of making haku is to actually make a sake. So we take that hakumai, it gets ground up into a starch. We put it in a pot, and these pots are in the floor. There's a big pot underneath it. You only see the top of it, and these floors are very warm. And in Japan, they call it brewing. So they brew the sake. So they take the rice starch, they add koji, and they add yeast, and they brew this all together. Once they're brewing it, they're making sake, right? And it's also the first step of sochu making, which I'll get into. So this is a one-step process. Now in whiskey making, for example, it's a two-step process. We mash it with malted barley, which the mashing takes a starch, converts it to sugar, and that's one process. And then a second process, which is fermentation. We add the yeast, and it turns that sugar into alcohol. So we use the traditional Japanese method of koji to make sake. So the first step, making sake. Right, this will kind of break it all down for you in a really easy to understand format. So we take hakumai, we add koji, we mash and ferment it, and that's how you make sake. It comes out at about 15% alcohol by volume. If we take the koji, add koji, brew it, and make sake, and we distill it once in a pot still, then we are making sochu. And then the last step of the journey is we take that sochu and we put it through column stills, which are very good at making very pure ethanol, very pure alcohol. So we take that and we distill it multiple times through two different column stills. So we're taking rice and we're continuously uniquely, again, traditionally Japanese in sake and soju, and then taking that and turning it into vodka by using not only column distillation, but also bamboo charcoal filtration. So the first distillation, the sochu, is actually important because we actually keep some of that aside. So we take some of that sochu and we keep it to one side, and then we put it through two different types of column stills. We take the column still liquid and we filter those two through bamboo charcoal. And then all three of these get blended back together to form haku vodka. So it's actually three different spirits in there. So it's always starting from the rice, going to the sake, those single pot still sochu, and then the two different distillates coming from the different stills. So it's, again, taking a vodka, we kind of it's been pulled into many different pieces. Technically and traditionally, it tends to be a really kind of one-shot process. People will put vodka, they'll take any ingredient like a grain and they'll multiple distill it through a column still. They'll filter it through charcoal, activated charcoal, and then they'll bottle it as vodka. So we didn't want to be, again, that's not Japanese. That's the traditional way. We made like that way all over the world. But to make it Suntory, to make it Japanese, the idea of using rice, bringing it through the traditional methods of sake making and soju making, and then taking that and transforming it into a vodka. But it's very unique.
Jamie, so can I just ask, so I understand that, the whole process, you always have to create, I mean, at least for Haku vodka, you have to create a sake first, and then you go through more levels of distillation before you arrive at Haku vodka. In just a
Right.
super easy to understand way to explain it, what do the distillation processes do to the taste, the flavor of the original sake?
Well, of course, distillation is really about concentrating the percentage of alcohol in a liquid. So like the sake is coming out at about 15%, right? Alcohol by volume. And then we're taking that, and then by distilling it, we're raising the alcohol so that the other flavors, other things become less and less and less. So we're really like refining the alcohol quantity as we multiple distill, but we are also distilling away some of the so sake tends to be very pungent, very strong, and we're refining the flavor.
Okay, so the vodka will be a more, like you said, refined, cleaner flavor, not so rice forward, not too intense in the rice flavor.
You will get that. It does have like a soft, sweet kind of rice flavor to it, it's definitely different from your traditionally rye or wheat based vodka. So it does kind of have this sweet, sort of delicate, sort of white rice hakumai aroma, but then and that comes more so from the soju that is blended in, but then becomes very refined, very smooth, very sweet, very light. It almost I would describe the sensation of drinking haku as ethereal. It's like it passes.
Okay.
But it's really different.
Okay.
And good different. I don't mean different bad. I mean it's very, very unique.
Okay.
And drink like neat and perfectly fine that way. Okay. You can drink it Russian style.
Wait, so how would you recommend?
One bottle, two shot glasses, and away you go.
Shots. Yeah, because I mean, traditionally, I mean, at least in the Singapore's context, because vodka was always used as an inclusion in shots when you're out partying with friends. But if you were to want to taste the vodka as it is, taste it for the quality product that Haku vodka is, how would you recommend serving Haku vodka?
Well, you always taste, if you want to learn about the spirit, the liquid itself, you always taste it neat, right? That with a glass of ice water, if you need to refresh your palate, but you really want to get the full experience of the different flavors that are there. And then once you have that, then you can sort of, move on. You can add a little bit of water, you could try it on the rocks with some ice cubes to chill and dilute it. And then you get a really good idea there about all the different flavors that are in the spirit.
Okay, got it. Yeah. And if it's in a cocktail, I mean, do you have any one or two top cocktail serves that you would recommend?
Well, I mean, again, if you want to showcase the flavor, like you would probably just do something very simple like a vodka soda. Even garnish it with a Japanese plum, a dry Japanese plum. So you want it to be simple, right? So it's about cleanliness, about purity. So vodka soda is really good. Again, you can also use it in a martini style, vodka-based martini style drink. But I really like this, and it is a really full flavored drink. But I really like it in Bloody Marys, and then it's a very traditional sort of breakfast style drink. I know you're not supposed to say that, but morning style drink, brunch. Let's say brunch. I think brunch is the cool word. It's a brunch style drink where you're mixing tomato juice with different spices, and we can make that very Japanese. So we can use some wasabi, we can use some horseradish, we can use sancho pepper if we want to, and go from there and make a very uniquely sort of Japanese style. Japanese style Bloody Mary.
Okay, understand. No, that sounds nice actually.
Actually,
Yeah.
it does. Right now, there's
Yeah,
no minions. There's no
no, there's none
minions.
here. None on my side as well. So
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's we usually do this sitting in a bar, which makes it so much easier
mm,
in terms of
yep,
being able to like enjoy it and try out some things. But
yep.
so that is Haku vodka.
Okay, so that is that. This is the last slide, right? Wraps up Haku vodka.
Not wraps up Haku.
Okay, sure. So next we'll move on to Japanese whiskeys.
I'm just worried about the Scotch part. Anyways,
Mm.
when you're ready.
Okay, yes. So we're back to the final part of the House of Suntory. The last part would be probably the one area that a lot of you guys would be very interested in. So it delves into Japanese whiskeys. And yes, Jamie will bring us through, the various brands that we have, very exciting Japanese whiskeys that have been crafted by the House of Suntory.
All right. Thanks, Ulrich. So yeah, we're going to move on to Japanese whiskey and Suntory whiskey. And you're going to have to pay a little bit of close attention because in Japanese whiskey making style, Suntory whiskey making style, we do something a little bit different. So I'm going to explain how we go along with Suntory whiskey and then, zoom in on the cheetah. So, of course, we've talked about Sanjiro Tori before. He's the founding father of Japanese whiskey. He's the founding father of spirits, Western style spirits production in Japan. And his real dream was with the building of, was to make a Japanese whiskey. So he had come into contact with it as a spirit and really wanted to make something uniquely Japanese, right? So in 1923, he finished construction of the Yamazaki distillery, and the Yamazaki distillery is the first distillery built in Japan, and interestingly enough, was the first single malt style distillery built outside of Scotland. So it was the first example of a single malt style distillery built outside of Scotland. So also very iconic in whiskey in general in the world, in the history of whiskey. So not only the history of Japanese whiskey, but even in the history of whiskey itself. So never been done before. Built the Yamazaki in 1923. He made his first whiskey, which was a single malt whiskey called the Shirofuda, which was released in 1929, and didn't do very well commercially. Now, it was made in the Scotch whiskey style of the 1920s, which was high alcohol, quite smoky because it was peated, and quite rough and young age. So at about 6 years of age, 5 to 6 years. So it wasn't well received by the Japanese people who were used to drinking, sake or soju, which tend to be, by comparison, very light-bodied, very low alcohol, and very lightly flavored. And given the fact that this wasn't commercially successfully, he started to think about flavor and started getting interesting in this idea of blending whiskey. Now, blended whiskey is made in Scotland, is equally as popular as single malt style whiskey, but was made by blending different single malt whiskeys together with grain whiskey. And this was to change the flavor profile, make it lighter, and be able to control the different intensities of flavors within the liquid itself. So in 1937, 9 years later, he released what is known now as Kakubin, which is the first example of a blended Japanese whiskey. And this is the most famous Japanese whiskey. It is still made today by Suntory, still made in that iconic square tortoiseshell bottle, and really represented, a change from making a single malt style to making a blended style. So this was then became the pursuit for the perfect blend, right? Never gave. Of course, you need to make single malt whiskey as a component of blend, but then started really experimenting with blended whiskeys and this idea of creating flavors together, right? And not having to depend on only one liquid, but using multiple liquids to achieve the final flavor. So Sanjiro Tori wanted an authentic, original whiskey made by the Japanese for the Japanese. And over the years, it has now become, more world-class Japanese refinement, Japanese taste. but really like started to think about these three words. And these are the three words that we use at Suntory to describe our whiskey, which is settled, refined, and complex. And all of our whiskeys, no matter where they're made by which distillery, all follow these simple words. Subtle, so it's not, it's very refined and it's yet very, very complex. So when you taste Japanese Suntory whiskey, you should always be thinking these three words. We've won many awards over the years, just to kind of point it out. So, since the 1990s, we've always won many, many, many awards by every international whiskey competition in the world. And it was really about the pursuit of perfection. We used it should, if you remember, we were talking about Roku, is this idea of perfection and creating like the perfect flavor. And that's kind of how it came about, right? So this is just kind of give you an idea of the map of Japan. We have 3 distilleries in Japan. We have the oldest, which is Yamazaki distillery, which is in Kyoto. This was in 1923. In 1973, they built the second single malt distillery called Hakushu, which is in the Southern Alps. But slightly before that, 1972, they built the Chita grain distillery. And the Chita distillery was created to produce the grain whiskey for the blended whiskeys made by Japan, whether that by Suntory, whether that was Kakubin or that was Old Time, or eventually the international one, which is Hibiki. So this distillery was built to create all that grain whiskey for those blends. So you can see there, those are the 3 distilleries, and I mentioned already Chita. So Chita now releases its own whiskey, and that's the focus whiskey for today. But we also have a whiskey called Hibiki, which you may or may not be familiar with, which is a blended whiskey made by blending whiskeys from all 3 distilleries. So there's whiskey from Yamazaki, whiskey from Hakushu, and whiskey from Chita, all in the Hibiki whiskey. Now, because that's, grain distilleries are kind of customarily, especially in Scottish thinking, to be a component of a blend, they weren't really showcased on their own. And that's where we really decided to be a bit different. So we're renowned for making these, our distilleries are very complex. We create about 100 different types of single malt whiskey through Yamazaki or Hakushu by changing some of the variables, right? Whether that's the fermenting tub, the pot still, or the type of cask. And we're creating these very unique flavored whiskeys. And this kind of just some photos to kind of show you. This is actually the taste, well, that's kind of the tasting room over at Yamazaki. And this is about 60 distinctive single malts, all matched by different fermentations, different stills, and different casks. So you can really start to see this idea of how the making of whiskey itself interacts with the flavor creation. And we see how that is, right? So this is a beautiful room. If you ever get a chance to go to Kyoto, go visit Yamazaki and go take a look in this room. So this is the idea about diversity. So, and because of all these different flavors created in different ways, the idea of blending flavor together, like not only in the traditional sense, like we do with Hibiki or Kakubin, but also even inside the distilleries, where instead of producing one malt whiskey all the way through the process and making it only one different way, even Yamazaki is the single malt whiskeys are different types of whiskeys married together inside to make a single malt. So like we use like white oak American Puncheon casks, which are slightly larger, to sherry butt, which are give a very fruity sort of dried fruit, to using Mizunara casks in every bottling of Yamazaki 12-year-old. So it's this diverse flavors. And I think the easiest way to think about Suntory whiskey, is we take it apart, or we take apart all the components of flavor, right? With those 60 single malt whiskeys. And then we reassemble those flavors back together to produce the whiskey itself. So it's this idea of deconstruction and reconstruction, So, and this is very important. This is very unique, by the way. This doesn't happen in any other distillery or any other whiskey company in the world, where they look at that breakdown of flavor and that reconstruction of flavor again. So this is uniquely Suntory. No distillery in Scotland, No other distilleries in Japan do this anywhere in the world. This is uniquely Suntory. So you can see like that's for Yamazaki. For 12-year-old Hakushu, we do the same thing. So produced up at the Hakushu distillery, we have hogshead white oak, which is another size of cask. We use a heavily peated, smoky whiskey aged in American oak. Then we add some sherry cask to that as well, Spanish butt, and again creating these very richly intense flavors separately, and then remarrying them or reconstructing them back together to form the Hakushu 12. So this idea of deconstruction and reconstruction is very important in the Suntory whiskey making process. So that brings us to Chita. So hopefully you guys all out there understood all that, and it was a little bit complex. Hopefully you're recording it, or you can kind of go back. Just remember, we take it apart, we disassemble the flavors, and then we reassemble them into the final product.
Okay.
So with all this whiskey knowledge again.
Yeah, Jamie, before we move into Chita, so yes, I think a lot of people know Yamazaki Hakushu Hibiki as like the flagship Japanese whiskeys from Suntory. In your opinion, what makes, for example, Yamazaki 12, it's almost like the flagship of Japanese whiskeys. It has won countless awards. Everyone talks about Yamazaki 12. In your opinion, what makes this whiskey such a great whiskey, or such a whiskey, worthy of all the accolades that it has garnered?
Well, I mean, really for us at Suntory, Yamazaki 12 represented the first international whiskey, single malt whiskey, like bottled as a Yamazaki single malt whiskey, and then really released to the international community. And, they say and opened it to the judgment of others. Yamazaki 12 won the first award ever, which was a gold medal in 1991, which was the first medal ever won by Suntory. So for us, it's a very iconic whiskey because it was the first one, like the first Suntory whiskey that was really raised. We did make other types of single malts before, but again, it represents the starting point of Suntory whiskey. And what made it unique, and to this day, what makes it the most unique, is that the Mizunara oak aged whiskey. Now, Mizunara is a Japanese oak, and it produces a very distinctive flavor, almost like a sandalwood or an incense sort of flavor, which is evident in the 12-year-old.
Mm.
So it was a real departure from it really represented a departure from what people thought or knew about single malt whiskey coming out of Scotland and other places.
Okay. And for Hakushu, like just from your personal preference or personal opinion, taste-wise, because I know we haven't really dived into taste and notes of the different distilleries, the different whiskeys. But how would Hakushu differ as a whiskey in terms of taste compared to Yamazaki that people talk a lot about?
Well, the biggest difference is Hakushu was reintroducing peat or the peat flavor to Japanese whiskey. So what had happened with the experience with Shirafudu and then with blends is that Japanese whiskey tended to be non-peated. So there was no smoky element in the whiskey from the peat smoke. And that was kind of continued until they decided to bring the peat smoke back. So the biggest difference between, say, Yamazaki and Hakushu is a peated versus a non-peated whiskey.
Okay, got it. Yep.
So if you like a peated style whiskey, you're going to really love the Hakushu. If you like a milder, non-peated, non-smoky whiskey, then the Yamazaki will be more up your taste buds, so to say.
Okay, and Hibiki would be, it's a blended whiskey. So like you said, components from these different distilleries. So it's different taste profile altogether. Right.
Yeah, it is a blend.
Sweeter, more floral.
More floral, more light, more sweet. Blended whiskey tends to be less equally tasty, but so you can think of single malt whiskey as the expression of a distillery. So this is it's like the brand of the distillery. So they make this whiskey, right? Whereas a blend, even though it does become its own whiskey, you're more free to kind of create a flavor profile. And Hibiki is lighter, sweeter, floral, some citrusy notes in there, and getting different things from the different distilleries. Even a little bit of peat smoke in some of the older Hibikis. Very, very tiny bit.
Okay, clear. And then lastly, we'll move on to Cheetah.
Yeah, so to just really kind of quickly run through the Cheetah, which is, you know, the newest whiskey in the Suntory whiskey portfolio. And really, I'm going to kind of gloss over some of this because it gets very, very complex, very, very fast. But Cheetah, like I said, produces all the grain whiskey for Hibiki, for Kakubin, for Suntory Old Whiskey. And grain whiskey always acts as the base. So this is what brings out the overall flavor of the whiskey. And then we use different malt whiskeys to shape the aromas and flavors of a blend, right? So starting as the base. So if you look at any blend, the largest component of whiskey in a blend is grain whiskey. And then using blended single malts from different distilleries to kind of change the flavors and aromas, right? So Cheetah produces all of it, right? So you can think of it, and this is the simplest way to look at it, is that, you know, if you have a single malt whiskey is made with malted barley only and a pot still, you get a single malt whiskey. And then grain whiskey is actually made from a corn grain, maize, which is a type of corn, goes through a column still or a continuous still, is again aged, and that would be a single grain whiskey. If I took the grain whiskey and the malt whiskey and mixed it together, I would have a blended whiskey. So you can see that's pretty clear. I don't really need to say. Now, where is Cheetah? Cheetah is located on the Cheetah Peninsula, of all places. And again, like Suntory, where we're talking about all the different and diverse whiskeys produced by either Yamazaki or Hakushu, was that started to create this idea of diverse style grain whiskey. So you can see that still in the background is actually a 4-column still. And started to decide diversity of whiskey and producing 3 different types: clean, medium, and heavy. And this was done simply by manipulating the amount of stills that we use. So a double column distillation would be a heavy whiskey, a 3-column distillation would be a medium, and a 4-column distillation would become a light. You know, and then, you know, started using some other different products in there, which we'll get into. So to make Cheetah is we take maize, which is corn, is a traditional grain to produce grain whiskey. We do throw a little bit of malted barley in there for the enzyme to convert the starches to sugars. And then we put it through this column still. And like I already explained, producing the different types, you know, whether heavy, medium, or clean. And then we also use different casks, whether that's white American oak or bourbon cask or Spanish sherry oak, and even using wine cask from France. So again, different ingredient, different processes, you know, different types of whiskey and different casks, you know, creates this diversity of grain whiskeys. Once we have all those diverse whiskeys produced by Cheetah, of course, the magic comes by remarrying, reblending them back together to form what's in the bottle, what's in the actual Cheetah, right? So those are the types. So we, you know, and each wine, these are the main components. So you see, like, the clean type is very pure, very clean, very sweet. So this makes sure that the whiskey is very light bodied. The medium, which is a medium type whiskey that we use, gives it a sort of a grainy sort. You start to taste that idea that you're getting whiskey. So the clean type is so pure you can't even really tell it's a grain base. Whereas the medium type really starts to, you know, be quite mild and kind of forms a barrier or a transition into the heavy type, which is very richly flavored, very grain flavored, lots of sweet, like, you know, caramel, vanilla notes in it. The Spanish oak sherry cask whiskey, which is in there as well, is providing, again, some more sweetness, but really rich and fruity. So dried fruits, rich sort of complexity. So it gives an added layer of complexity. And the wine cask, the last one, gives it the sort of really an astoundingly strawberry aroma to the whiskey and quite smooth. So by marrying and blending all these 5 different types of whiskeys, we end up with Cheetah, single grain whiskey. Right? So in a nutshell, right, we're taking a distillery like Cheetah, or we did it with Yamazaki first and then did it with Hakushu and then do it with Cheetah, is this diversity in the making. So changing the still type or the size and shape of the still or the amount of columns, making distinctive liquids. Then taking those distinctive liquids and aging them in different types of casks, producing a multitude of different flavors and aromas in the different finished whiskeys. and then taking those aromas and carefully matching them back together or blending them back together to form the finished whiskey. So Cheetah follows that tradition, and is probably the most complex grain whiskey that you have ever tasted, if you've ever tasted grain whiskey. So we get lots of flavors like creme brulee, spiciness, honey sweetness, even a floral aroma into it, a little bit of strawberry. It's very sweet on the palate, very honey style sweetness. Even's got a little bit like minty sort of freshness to it. And then you get like an oaky sort of dry, bitter sweetness at the end. So it's, not as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as, richly flavored as a single malt whiskey or even as a blend. But has this really diverse sort of flavor profile coming in from the different whiskeys made by Cheetah. So it's light, sweet, creme brulee and honey, a little bit of spiciness and oakiness.
And Jamie, how would you recommend serving or consuming Cheetah?
Cheetah, okay, now that you asked, I have a perfect slide for you. Now it's extremely versatile. Now Cheetah, we always start off with it straight or neat, and this is again how you kind of get the full impact of the whiskey. I would say for Cheetah, my favorite way to drink Cheetah is right in the middle there with a highball. So that's just whiskey 1 to 4 parts with soda water. So 1 part Cheetah whiskey, 4 parts water on ice. It's light, it's refreshing, it's clean. And then these are like the different ways they make whiskey in Japan. So on the rocks, of course, can be enjoyed, or half rocks, which is half ice, half whiskey on ice. Plain water, which is with whiskey water. But really, to me, stands out as a highball.
Okay. And I'm seeing this hot whiskey here. I mean, I've never seen this, or I've not tried it before. Hot whiskey. I mean, how do you do this, sir?
Well, this is very traditional. Like in winter months in Japan, they would, and especially on the northern islands where they get quite a significant snowfall, is to warm up the whiskey. So they basically just add really warm water below boiling point with water to the whiskey, and then you drink it like a tea. So if you think of whiskey is like the flavoring of the tea, and then you warm it up so that, like, you come in from the cold and the winter and the snow and you're shivering, then you have a nice hot drink of whiskey. Works very well for après-ski, by the way. Like if you go skiing and you come in from all day outside, you're cold, the nice hot whiskey will just warm you right up. Okay,
wow. No, this sounds nice.
Yeah, we just got to find snow here in Singapore, which obviously we don't have, and we have no way to get to snow anytime soon. So
yeah, no way. We're still stuck here for sure.
For a while. Anyways.
Yeah.
So that's Cheetah. So it's Suntory complexity in a bottle. It's really quite special.
Okay. So I think that wraps up Cheetah and portfolio of Suntory Japanese whiskeys that we have. And yes, anything else, Jamie? That is the last slide, right?
That's it. I think I might have an arigato.
Oh, yes, arigato gozaimashita. Yes.
We need to have that thank you slide there because you guys spent, if you made it this long, you spent quite a time listening to me talking about a lot of things. So.
No, it was a fantastic session. Yes, thank you, Jamie. And to our viewers out there who are still watching, yes, thank you for going through this session with us, and we hope that you have had a greater appreciation of spirits, crafted by the House of Suntory. And the next time, whether you're out there in a bar, in a restaurant, or just at a shopping center, in the supermarket, pick a bottle up.
Duty free, but
Yep. And yes, that's it. And do enjoy the Singapore Property Expo. A lot of exciting things out there, and we'll see you again.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.